Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Good afternoon, or I'm not sure it's still yet afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. Ciao Marco.
Ciao Stefano.
Eva Maria, shall we wait still a couple of minutes?
Yes, I think we can.
Yeah?
Okay. Yeah.
Bianca, you're here as well, right? I see you.
Yes, hi. Hello.
Hi.
So how is everybody holding up during difficult times?
Good, sort of. No, it's going fine. Yeah.
We're trying our best.
It's getting better, I think, slowly, but
Yes, it's good to experience now and then some improvement because that makes us want to keep going.
definitely.
True. Even though I haven't been traveling to Italy for almost 2 years, so I kind of feel like,
Wow.
yeah, want to go back at least a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Let's say in the summer, maybe. It's just so difficult now with all these tests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not seeing your family, it's just probably the most difficult part of everything.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's an interesting experience. But at the same time, it's also quite nice. You know, you're calm at home. There's not much to do.
Yeah.
It's full of work to do. So,
Two
yeah,
sides of the coin, I guess.
true. And you?
Well, yeah, it's I think now it's getting better. I mean, I just find probably the most difficult the social difficulties now that we actually cannot meet with a lot of people, like communicate as normal as we used to. So that's a struggle, but yeah, we'll see some improvements in the summer. I bet.
Yeah. What shall we do? Shall we start?
Yes, I think we can start.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much and welcome everybody to this panel on careers in social law and health law, which is a pleasure. I'm co-chairing with my colleague Eva Maria Foldes. Today we will have 4 speakers who will share with us their experience, their career experience, and maybe some tips and tricks about how to make, let's say, how to make a career in these 2 fields. So we will have Marco Cilento, who is head of institutional policy at the European Trade Union Confederation in Brussels. Bianca Maria Opra, who is junior labor and social relations specialist at ENGIE in Romania. Welcome. Marine Bussonier, I hope I pronounced right your surname, who works as independent researcher and consultant in the field of global health, human rights, and humanitarian action. And last but not least, Adelina Itsova, who works in the field of quality and regulatory compliance at For Web Medical. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We will start with the social law part. So I will give the floor to Marco and then to Bianca. And then in the second part, I will give Eva Maria, my colleague, will give the floor to Adelina and Marine. We will have Q&A sessions at the end of each presentation, each speech, and feel free to use the chat if you have questions. And I know that there is also a live stream in YouTube, so if you have questions, you can use also that channel. So Marco, the floor is yours. Thanks again for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Stefane. Thank you for inviting me in this session. I prepared a presentation that will try to help the description of my professional career. And first of all, let me just spend a few words on what the European Trade Union Confederation is, because probably most of the people is not familiar with this organization. You know, the trade unions are representing workers all over Europe. There we have every country has a number of organizations that have the objective to defend the interest of workers. And the greatest part of this organization that exists in all the European countries are associated to the European Trade Union Confederation. So our role is to represent, to give voice to workers at European level. It means mainly with European institutions or with European organized employers, or in multinational companies that naturally operate at cross-border level. We have members in the European Union and in the European Union, but not only. We also aggregate unions in countries that are accessing the European Union. So we have Turkey, Balkan countries, etc. My task is the head of institutional policy of the TUC, but what does it mean in practice? I would like to explain you step by step. But before understanding how I arrived to have this role in the European Trade Union Confederation, is important to understand where I come from. It's not easy to talk about myself, but I will try to. And first of all, in order to understand what is the professional careers, is important to understand what is my individual personal background, but also what my educational background and the professional one. That is why, if possible, I will try to start sharing the screen.
Should be able, but
I should be able to talk. I hope that you can see, just a moment. Voila. You can see the presentation now.
yeah.
I will launch it. So, first of all, where do I come from? It's important to understand even the entire path and to know myself. I come from this wonderful city. Few of them, some of you can recognize the city with the volcano and the huge gulf is Naples in Italy. The sign is that I come from the south of Italy. And this, as many colleagues of mine tell me, I have many of the characteristics of someone coming from the south of Europe. Just to tell you where I come from, I mean, when I was young, starting studying my university time, it was the time when Maradona was playing in Naples, and I was used to go everywhere to see him playing. I'm a big fan of the Naples football team. But just also to tell you what was my life at the period when I was studying at universities and starting looking for a job, because otherwise it's difficult to understand many of the choices done in that period. I can give you some elements of what was the content, the social context in that moment. First of all, there was a virus going on and creating a lot of concern and creating a lot of troubles to people, and many people died from this virus, which is the AIDS virus, and it had a strong impact on the way we were used to live, especially for the young generation. It was a huge change because we were coming from a period of great individual freedoms, also in the personal relationships, and this virus had a huge impact on our behaviors and capacities. And if you want to stay on the more on more social side, in that period, just to make you understand, in the pop music, it appeared a song that had a huge success in this period. Was Bombastic from Shaggy. Is quite relevant because it was really, there were many songs in this period that were quite popular, but this one was announcing something new that really happened in the future. and that is why I decided to put it as a typical song of that area that to characterize until the period I was living in that moment. And another important thing is I choose to show the compact disc as main innovation because it changed completely the capacity to store data, and for us was a huge improvement in the use of technology in that period. And I use this as a symbol of the technological change in that years. We are in the 90s, exactly as you have understood. More historically, what we were when I was in the university, ending my university career and starting finding for jobs. What was happening? There was the fall of the Berlin Wall, and in that period, many students were coming from the rest of the world in Europe to see what was happening there. And in fact, my great friends and I had great experience with people arriving from all over Europe in my university years that opened my mind a lot. And that is why I started thinking about going abroad. That for an Italian from the south was really quite something at that period. And then we had also the first Iraq war. And this is associated to the World Trade Center. Because I had a lot of friends from the United States that were, a lot of young people were coming in Europe to see what was happening. I went to the, I revisited the United States together with them, and we went to see the World Trade Center in New York. This is quite connected with the Iraq war because in the very end, the attack that was in 21 on the World Trade Centers was somehow related to this very sad period of history. At that time, these kind of events were really creating a situation influencing the economy, the society, and the perspective we had of the future. Another important things happening in that period that was very decisive for my future professional career, even if I didn't know at the moment that it was so important, was the Maastricht Treaty. And in this case, I used the results of the French referendum on the Maastricht Treaty, because in Maastricht it was decided that Europe was a political union, and it was really a huge boost on the European project. And we all were, it was 91 and 92, we were all projected in a new debate and discussion on what Europe was. It was really a huge event that was involving all the population in a big discussion, public debate and political discourse. For young people like me, it was really the way to start looking at Europe with different eyes. And this is also the process of enlargement of the European Union that Italy was one of the founders. But at that period, it was already, we were waiting for the entry of the Scandinavian countries, but Europe was already a big reality. But with the Maastricht Treaty, it arrived really strongly in our lives. Let's go now. This is the environment in which I was living when I was finishing my university period and starting looking for a job. My professional experience was divided between when I left the university, I started working as a researcher in the university, and particularly in 3 different universities in Italy. One in Siena, where I had my laurea, my graduate periods, and I was studying economic and banking. The university in Rome, when I was specialized in labor law, and in Pavia, where I had my PhD once again in labor law. It's strange because I started my studies working on economic and banking. Also, my final work at that time was the first choice I had for my final work at the university was in maths. But then suddenly Europe arrived in my life, because in the University of Siena there was a Jean Monnet course on labor law, was paid by the European Union, and I realized in that period that my performances under the labor law in general was quite better than my performances in economic and econometric matters. So I moved from the economics, also for my final work, from economic issues to labor law, and this was something that brought me a lot of change in my life, and it was also due to the fact that there was this specific course with a very good professor that was paid by the European Union and promoted by the European Union. So it changed a lot. At this moment, I started to work absolutely and concentrated all my efforts in studying not only labor law, but labor law in the European Union. And this brought me to get closer to one trade union, which is the Trade Union Confederation of Free Workers in Italy, which is called CISL, is the one you see on the left. And the trade union in Italy were interested in the studies I was doing at European level and the labor law related studies. And I was engaged in a research training institute, in a research institute of the trade union called Sindenova. And this was, I made a lot of studies there. Really, we made research and studies on all aspects of industrial relation and labor law, and really helped me to create a knowledge of the topic that was not only theoretical, but also visiting workplaces, visiting companies. This was a fantastic experience that lasted for 5 years. And in the meantime, I started having my first contacts with international organizations like the International Labour Organization, because they were organizing special matters on social aspect, labor law and industrial relation in the Balkans, Montenegro, Serbia, Croatia. We are talking, we are in the 2000s. It means that Europe was changing a lot. It was a great experience to go to East, to visit Eastern countries and to teach there in special universities organized by the ILO for young students in that countries in order to get them familiar with industrial relation, with labor law, etc. But all this international work that I was doing with the university, with the trade unions, and working on specific issues of industrial relation and labor law gave me the possibility to be contacted by one European federation, EFAT. EFAT is the organization at European level that organizes workers in the food industry and agriculture. So this organization that had plenty of multinational companies operating in that area needed someone that could help workers to negotiate at European level and to be represented at European level. So multinational companies operating in more countries had to organize workers in the same company but working in different countries. And I was asked to start working with this organization to exactly with this task, organizing workers in multinational companies. And then it was 2001, and then I moved to European Trade Union Confederation. But here I have a story to tell you, because I added some numbers that is quite interesting to understand why I decided to move from the academic side to the trade union movement as a professional perspective. Because the income I received for my work in the universities when I started being a researcher or giving classes, lessons as a practitioner in the university, my income was zero. Exactly. There is this bad habit in the Italian academic world that when you start working in the university for the first years, you don't earn money. And for me, it was impossible because I couldn't rely on the support of my family 100%. They were very supportive, but I had to start earning my life. So for the unions and the research was guaranteeing me 500 euro, the equivalent, because in that moment there was no euro yet, the equivalent of 500 euro per month to work in this organization that you can imagine was a real poor life. But in this case, I was very young and the motivation were super high. I was so happy to this kind of work because I felt that this was the things I wanted to do. So I discharged other working activities that were richer, and I invested all my energies, even if the salary and the wage was very low. But what happened after 5 years? After 5 years of this job, with a lot of difficulties to survive, with so little money, I received an offer from this EFAT that was 4 times the wage I had in Italy. But the only problem was that I have to move from Italy, and I was used to live between Rome, Siena, and other Italian cities to make my research activities. I had to move from Italy to Brussels. But frankly speaking, when I saw the difference of salary or wage, I took my decision in 2 hours and a half, just the time to pack my luggages and to move to Brussels. And here, the Europe was at the center of my life, because if I could do it in so short time and with just saying yes after having done a selection in Brussels for this job, and I won the selection, the moment I won the selection, I moved in Brussels were really few days, and I could do it only because we had the free movement. I never realized until that moment how relevant it is to have the free movement framework in Europe. If you take a normal immigrant worker in Europe today, before moving from their country to a job in the European Union, they have to go through an enormous amount of red tape and obstacles. For me, it was just the possibility to decide, to say yes, and in 2 days I was in Brussels looking for an apartment. During this year in Brussels, I had the opportunity to develop many projects. What is interesting in our work and in working in the professional career I had, that I was always free to follow my inspiration. In the sense that the unions have give you, especially at European level, give the possibility to explore the world you have outside and to develop some ideas that you feel that you think can bring benefits to the people you represent in different ways. And here you have some of the projects I personally developed. I worked a lot at the beginning of my career on employee financial participation to support new forms of distribution of wealth, and we worked for years with many organizations in a network to explore this kind of way to build wages, distribute wealth, guarantee support to people using financial instruments. But then I was also asked to work a lot with migrants, and I'm quite proud of the work we did. Union Migranetti was a network of contact points providing information to migrants that were present in 15 European countries. This was one of the most experiences I did. But as you can see, I moved from a pure financial economic matter to something which is related to the life of migrants. So Laborint was another project we developed with employers to support refugees during the recent years to be integrated in the labor market, and also this became a mainstream activities of the European Union. Very proud to have I participated very actively in this project. And here you have another couple of projects that I'm engaged on now. One is a big coalition to promote the European Pillar of Social Rights. Rethinking is an activity that involve a lot of academics to work together with the unions to design a new economic system that is more respectful of environmental and social requirements. And Luci sul Lavoro is a festival that I organize in Italy with some friends. Is for 10 years now, is becoming one of the most important events related where people can talk about work in all its dimension, and probably to represent work through arts like music, theater, and other forms of art. And together with this representational work, we try to elaborate also some contents with conferences, etc. This is just to show you some of the big projects I was involved in during these years in Brussels. And frankly speaking, I'm quite happy that I could have a very transversal approach to the job I do. I was working at the start of my career. You have three positions that I occupied during my professional career that gave a lot to me. The European Works Councils are the, as I was saying a few moments ago, in multinational companies, you have to organize workers that work in different countries. And normally when you organize these workers in different countries, they meet in one body that is called the European Works Council. When you have people arriving from different countries that have to fight for their own interests, you have a lot of difficulties that you have to overcome. It's not so easy, even because if you have someone coming from France that has to work with someone working in Germany or in Italy or in Belgium, and to try to have the same interest and the same language to talk with one single employer in order to find the way to defend their own interest. In this kind of work, I learned how important it is to speak the language of the business if you want to obtain something from the business. It's important that you can really talk the language of them if you want to make them understanding what is the problem of the workers. But at the same time, I had to manage the different ways the workers were used to work in their own country, but also to be organized in their own countries. One thing is to be a trade unionist in Italy, or another thing is be a trade unionist in France. So you have to learn, in order to make this group of workers united, you must know how they are used to work in their own country. This was particularly challenging because I had to learn all the different systems in different countries. Then you have the language barriers, and frankly speaking, I started using Google Translation in 2001. So it was really at the origin. It was really not working very well, but it was quite useful to overcome language barriers. But of course, the best thing is to try to learn a couple of languages. So arriving in Brussels, I had to learn English and French. My mother tongue was Italian, and now I can also speak some Spanish. Impact of technologies is great because we started using technology a long time ago. And when I talk about technologies, I'm talking, for instance, using of emails that 20 years ago was not so self-evident, or having chatting online, or having the possibility to share documents on closed platforms. These were all technologies that we introduced and were quite innovative at the time, even if today are part of our daily work. As policy advisor at the ETUC, I will not go through all these points, but the European Trade Union Confederation is really a place where we address many policy areas that deal with our daily life, from organizational working time, work-life balance measures, etc. There are really a lot of policy areas in our work. But here we had really to manage the differences between making rules at European level or national level, and the difficulty to exercise leadership when you have to work on a cross-border dimension. Exercising the leadership in a cross-border dimension, even if when you operate with homogeneous group workers, I have to represent the interests of workers. But when you are in a national context, often workers themselves consider to have a similar objective. But when we go to a European, you have the national dimension that arrives always in the dynamics of these groups. So you have to always work to create a European solidarity among workers, a European common objectives. which is quite not so self-evident. I mean, there is a continuous work of explanation of you have to build this common understanding, common view of things every day, because the national identity is really well rooted in our cultures. In this, as head of
Can I ask them to maybe 5 minutes to wrap up?
yes.
A minute? Okay.
Okay, so probably it took too long, but sorry, let me launch again. One message that I want to give to you is really the problem of having a culture with identity. When you work in international environments, but in general in your life, when you work with groups, try to try to understand that your culture is your best asset. But the culture can change. When you interact with other people, your culture will change, and you will be different from in the future if you interact with other people and you are open to accept their own culture. If you present yourself with your identity is static. You cannot change it. It's what you have in your identity card. If you try to participate in this group defending your identity, you simply enter into conflict because identity cannot be changed. And this is quite exclusive. I think this is one of the most important learning. And so my culture is my asset. My identity is important, but I have to consider for what it is and not to put to try to defend it at all costs. I was asked to say something on the impact. Really, just one element that I want to share with you on my life. I worked on European rules on these areas. Stefania, if I have the possibility, I will just give you an example of what this means, for instance, to make a European law on work-life balance. Yeah. Because this is a very special experience. I was engaged in the lobby work with the European Parliament, European Commission to design the directive on work-life balance. It means that our idea was to make a law where men and women had to distribute obligatory, compulsory, the family charges and the charges for care of other people, to avoid that women take the entire burden of the family charges. And then we went to country by country, government by government, to advocate our measures. And we met Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, to convince the Hungarian government to vote in favor of this directive. And they were trying to convince us that the gender gaps or the imbalances in the distribution of gaps of charges between men and women was an issue of identity. So our identity as Hungarian say that the family charges are on women, and men are better seen if they dedicate all their entire life to work, and that the woman can take care of the family. So Europe cannot ask us to change our identity. So we were completely, so upset about this, because how can you imagine that the gender gaps or the position of the women in society and work can be considered an issue of identity? And when I was saying before, it can be something cultural, this can be understandable, but the culture can evolve, can develop. You can change, you can make your life better for you and for your citizens, and to rebalance the position in your society and to be stronger in all aspects of life. It's an issue of justice. So please accept. So and still today, when we have been in Porto a few days ago talking about the European Pillar of Social Rights, Orban with the Polish government and with the Slovenian government came up again with the idea that gender equality should not exist, because it is an issue of identity of countries to decide and to be respected. And for us, is really a mission to change this. First of all, it's not. Nobody can say that the identity includes gender gaps. There are some cultural obstacles to be overcome, but we are there to fight to have a better societies and to change this. And we will change this also with the legislation. Luckily, there is a huge majority of political forces, countries, and organizations in Europe that consider gender equality absolutely a pillar of our culture. And of course, this view is prevailing. But as you can imagine, we have to spend all our energy to every day affirming the principle there is an equality between men and women. I had more examples, but probably I spoke longer than expected, so I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Marco. Can I give the floor to the students if they have any questions? I do have a couple of questions, but I'll give the floor first. Anybody?
I have a question. If oh, sorry,
Yeah.
somebody else. Yeah. So you talked briefly about the standardization and unity of European principles, especially in the field of equality. But how do you think, and what exactly is the path, and how do you deal with that in your current work in order to succumb this rigidness in terms of leaders? Because this doesn't happen only with Orban, it happens in many countries.
Okay, working with on equality is a very complex issue. Right? In my professional career, I was not always so keen to include the gender issues in mainstreaming the gender issues and issues of equalities. At certain moments, even because from my origins, I was convinced that we had obtained already a good level of equality. Where I changed my mind was exactly when we lobbied for this directive on work-life balance, because I touched with my hands how the inequalities were in the brain, rooted in the political thinking of certain leaders and political forces. So what we have done now is to have a real, what we call the mainstreaming, such including equality. Not only gender is really an emergency today, but I also have many other aspects, groups that deserve to be treated, to have this in all other policy areas, with training, education, and including in all our positions this topic, and then engaging with the national leaders. Because the problem is that when you do it a European objective, you must convince that the trade union leaders in all countries will be consistent with that, and they will say no to a reform that, for instance, does not improve the situation of women in the labor market. So you must be able to say no, even if you get, if there is a group of workers that will benefit for something, and you are tempted to say yes. But if it is detrimental to the equality of women in terms of opportunity or rights, you must say no. And this is what we are trying to do. I don't know if it answers to. And in terms of organization, we have established a women committee. We have a women committee in all, and we are giving a lot of voting powers so that women in our decision-making bodies have a specific votes that can influence our position all the time. So in our democratic process, we have introduced elements that give more power to the point of view of women, not only with quotas, because we also have quotas, but also exactly in the voting in the democratic processes.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Somebody?
Just as a follow-up, if you allow me, because you spoke about the establishment of committees for women. So what are the official channels of communication in order for women to reach and to speak up and to, I don't know, address?
You mean our channel communication? As unions, our main concern is to arrive from what we call the political level, the work I do, to the workplace. This is our first objective. So we have some internal, we have a democratic structure. It means that our decision try to come from the bottom to give us the priorities, and then we communicate to the basis with some typical. We have traditional instruments like assemblies, participation on workplace events. We have plenty of people that can communicate our strategy in person in traditional way. But now we are exploring a lot also the possibility to have new technology, social networks with dedicated groups to have this not only from the bottom to the top, but to give a feedback to the people on the results we obtain.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question at this stage? No, I have one for you. So you spoke about the importance of language to work in Brussels, and you also mentioned about your work in the, let's say, the policy sphere, and you also mentioned lobbying. Like, what skills do you think students should develop to start a career in this area?
Yeah, I had a slide, but I was too long.
Okay.
No, but it's fine. So for me, language is not only is an asset in itself. If you want to have a career in my field, I mean, you can have the same career if you're interested in labor law, industrial relation. You can do this with the trade unions, but you can do also with employers, or you can do with institutions. What is really matters for me is this approach to have a social dialogue-based industrial relations, etc. If you want to operate this at cross-border level, of course you must learn some languages. But the problem with the languages is to start learning a language record that allows you to speak with people from different cultures, not to elaborate concept that can travel in space, so from Italy to Spain and Germany, and in time, so that can resist in the time. So having a language assets, it also allows you to build the way you can talk to people in a way that can be understood in several countries, even when you speak in English. So I speak in English and I use concepts and situations that can be easily translated and can arrive to people in other countries, and also in the course of the time. I think this is an important asset. And another important asset is to start learning intercultural environmental things. There are many people are convinced that they can address the intercultural aspects with good sense and being funny. No, in reality, there are courses and assets that you can all learn with training. I had a very long training in managing intercultural assets that goes from the physical positioning in the community you have to the way you can lead the groups that are intercultural. This is really a hard assets. It's not only initial if you behave well or not. This is quite important. And another thing is to study a lot, in the sense that it requires a continuous level of studying, really studying, and not because the dynamics in the world change all the time. To monitor what is happening and the implication of this in several contexts requires a continuous exercise of reading, studying, and going in depth into the things.
Thank you very much, Marco. I will now maybe stop here, and students, you're free to ask questions in the chat, and then we will open again the Q&A after Bianca. So Bianca, I will now give you the floor. As I mentioned before, you work as Human and Social Relations Specialist at ENGIE Romania, and you're also one of our alumna. So it's nice to have you back. You have now the floor.
Thank you. It's first of all, it's very nice seeing familiar faces, but also new faces. It's nice meeting Marco and Adelina. I won't have such a nice presentation like Marco had, and unfortunately, I will have to leave you in about 40 minutes or so because I have another meeting. But I will try to introduce myself a bit, and my current job, and how I came to work in this field. As you mentioned, I'm an alumna of this program. I finished a couple of years ago. I graduated in 2019, After this, I continued my studies with an LLM in international business law at Coventry University in the UK, where I finished at the top of my class. And then, but unfortunately, I was only able to have face-to-face classes for half of my master program. After that, of course, the pandemic happened, and this was sort of something that accelerated my coming back home to Romania. I finished here while back home with my parents. I finished my master degree, and then because of my degree in international business law, I was very curious to find out what lays behind a business. What is the behind the scenes of operating a business or a corporation? I was very passionate in finding out and in having insight, very close insight into a business. So that's for me to take into consideration when choosing to work for a corporation. And then also let's say it made me interested in learning more and gaining more knowledge about this human resources side and about employees, because at that time, and even now, I think that for a company, the employees are the most important stakeholders. So that's what made me try to look for jobs in this area and to try to combine everything that interested me at that time. I was lucky enough, even though in Romania most of the companies froze their employments and their recruitment processes because of the COVID-19 situation, I was lucky enough to find a traineeship at this company, NG Romania, which is the main in Romania. It's a company that supplies natural gas and electricity, and of course it distributes also natural gas. This company had an opening for a traineeship, but not in the legal department, but in the human resources department, which was a bit, I viewed it as a risk back then, because all of my education was legally based, and I wanted to work in the legal field, but my curiosity for exploring the human resources side made me want to join the team. And I'm very glad I did, because not only do I get to still explore the human resources side, but also I have activities that deal with, for example, examining the internal regulations, aligning them to the current laws in Romania. So doing what I did study during my law program here at the Hague University, but also during my master program. What makes me attracted to this field of work and what makes it interesting for me, to be honest, it's the fact that me and my manager, we have to continuously communicate with the trade unions. The Trade Union Federation of Gas in Romania is a national trade union which was founded 20 years ago. It combines a number of over 60 trade unions. It's huge. And we deal, out of the 60 trade unions, we deal with 16 or 17, so a lot of people. And they represent the interests of thousands of employees. So for me, it's a huge deal to communicate and to sit at the same table with the representatives of employees while having the knowledge of the entire business in front of me and being able to inform them of any changes and anything happening in the company. So also another interesting part of my job is, for example, currently we are negotiating the annual collective labor agreement with them. And it is very interesting to to sit in the negotiation sessions and to witness all the discussions and everything that goes on, and the relationship, let's say, between the employer and the employee, because it's a very natural thing to see a discussion on a lot of subjects like laws, of course, but also finances, also annual budgets, also the training and development of employees. So a lot of subjects that do not concern necessarily what I studied during this program, but things that are very important for the employees of a company. As a challenge, let's say, that I encountered during my very short until now career path, let's say it was the language barrier. I was not required to know necessarily English. It was an advantage, of course, but I wasn't required to learn English. However, I was required to know Romanian, which of course it is my native language, but at the same time it was very hard, let's say, finding out how to learn again the terms, the judicial terms in my own language, which was very hard after studying everything in English. But other than that, there were not many challenges that I encountered other than developing abilities such as active listening or communication skills, which of course everyone acquires and develops up until a certain level during the law program. But actually being there and communicating with trade unions and employees representatives, it's a different type of communication skills that you need to have, or even negotiation skills and being able to persuade. So when everything comes together, I would say for the students that it is very important for them to try to, if they really want a career in this field of law, that I would say it's very important to learn how to communicate very well with a lot of types of people, because even in, well, let's say for me, in my case, the people that are the trade union persons that I communicate with daily, they have no clue what the laws are about, or they have some sort of clue, but they were not educated in this sense. So you have to learn how to communicate with them and explain to them very thoroughly everything, so that they can understand, and then they can communicate to the entire body of employees in the company. So it's very important to have very strong communication skills, active listening, of course, and problem solving, because a lot of problems come your way when you have to, when you represent the employer and when you have to give back explanations or information of any sort. I don't know what else to tell you. I enjoy better, let's say, communication than me just talking myself and people watching me. But
We can open.
I don't know. Sorry?
We can open the floor for Q&A if you prefer.
Yes, of course we can open. Yeah. I would just as a last thing, it's well, for me, this job does not only entitle, let's say, laws or the knowledge of regulations, national regulations, international regulations, but it's more appropriate to, it's closer to the human resources field. And I would suggest, if the students want to explore this field of law, they should be curious to explore also human resources, and to not consider it as a risk like I did when I first got this job, because I thought, well, it's something totally different than I studied, but it's actually not. It's if they like this side, they should find things that are similar to or that come close to the law as they can. So yeah, and yeah, we can open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much also for the
Thank
tips
you.
that you gave us, maybe indirectly, about human resource management and what we
Yes.
do well in the curriculum. Are there any questions?
Not actually relearn it, because I am very keen on learning new things, and for me it was a curiosity and to know about laws in Romania from before I started studying international and European law. But I would say for someone who does not have any clue on Romanian laws or national laws, they should have a bit of knowledge, but this is not a necessity for getting a job in this field, or at least for me it was not. It was more on how to do research and how to research yourself in a short amount of time, the necessary information that you need to use to do your job. So I did not relearn the law or learn the Romanian law, but I needed to learn how to do research in Romania and to find the legal basis, to find everything that was necessary for my job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Somebody? Okay, maybe I can ask one question. So you were saying now that, as you said, that it was a rather smooth transition to go back to your own country. Which skills did you have to learn to do this job that were not taught in the program or also in your master program?
I would say not necessarily skills that I needed to learn again, but it was a cultural difference that I had to get used to. So I never had any work experience with Romanians ever in my life, even though I lived here for 19 years before leaving the country. So I did not know that it is a kind of difference between the work ethic of Romanians versus the work ethics of the Dutch and then of the British people. So that I had a bit of a cultural shock, let's say, and that I had to get used to. But in terms of skills, I would say that our program is very prepared in at least making students acquire a lot of skills, and then of course they can develop the skills throughout their lives and their work experience and internship and everything like this. But yeah, the skills that I needed the most and that I feel like I acquired them in this program were communication skills, of course, organization skills. For me, it was very important, the problem-solving skills and research. Oh, and teamwork. I cannot stress enough how important teamwork is, because when you represent let's say the employer in front of a trade union, you need to work with a team, and you need to all of the informations have to be circulated with a lot of people, and everything that you say represents the company. So it's very important. The teamwork is very important.
Thank you.
May I have perhaps a follow-up question to Bianca? So based on your experience and also what you've been telling us about the most important skills that you have been using and developing, what would be your recommendation to the lecturers here, like what do you think that we should put even more emphasis on when preparing our students to get ready for the labor market and specifically for a career in your field?
I'm not very sure if the professors need some sort of preparation to teach students any skills because of the structure of the classes and of the structure of the educational system itself in the Netherlands. Here in Romania, everything is theoretical, while there and in our program specifically, students not only through their professors, but they get the chance to experience everything through the projects and the internship opportunities. And yeah, they get to acquire and develop skills, not necessarily from their professors, but from the whole experience itself. But I would suggest that the professors keep being as open as they are towards the students and accept every stupid question, because my main advice to all the students is ask any question they feel it's useful for them, even if it may seem stupid. So if the professors continue being as open as they were during my studies, I feel it's a very, it's a very welcoming feeling towards the students. So they can, I don't know, they can learn as much as they want to.
Thank you. And maybe a follow-up question, probably also the last one for this part, for both Marco and Bianca. Do you need to be a qualified lawyer to be a trade unionist or to at European level or to work in the HRM department of a company? Because that's a question that often pops up in students' mind, like, do I need to do I need to pass the bar in my own country to just carry out a legal profession in this field or in other fields as well? But let's stick to this one.
Can I start, Marco, giving the fact that I have less, let's say my career path is less lengthy than yours, so you've had a lot of more experience and positions. But for me, it's not it was not a necessity, and it is not a necessity to be a lawyer, to become a lawyer, to take the bar exam, or to have my diploma recognized here in Romania. But nonetheless, I'm currently in the process of getting my diploma recognized here. In case later I would like to take the bar exam and to become a lawyer, we have our own, my company and most of the big companies in Romania have a law office or lawyers, a team of lawyers that represent the company in case something happens or in case there's any need of the sorts. But me specifically, I do not need to take the bar exam in order to work in a company, in an international company, let's say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From my side, I can say that many years ago, I felt the need really to have a huge specialization in law. And in fact, I had a PhD. As I said in my presentation, I started studying economics, but then I ended up with law. And I decided to have a PhD in labor law. At that time, I was working with multinational companies, and we had plenty of legal cases. And I also made use of specialist lawyers that could also go to the court. But in the course of the time, it changed, and now the more I had the more political position, the more economic and politics of law arrived in my skill baggage, let's say. So just to conclude, in an organization like the TUC that covers many policy areas and the trade union movement that can have many things, you have the possibility to work as a full law specialist and also to have court cases at different levels, also international courts, to follow personally and to go there to discuss. We have colleagues that participate in the ILO legal cases. They were not brought before the law. But at the same time, in my view, for the career I did, I prefer to have a multidisciplinary approach. So good knowledge of several aspects in order to create more interconnection, correlation, to read the reality in all its aspects. But it's really depend on your inspiration and where you want to be placed in this kind of work. So both are, I have to say, don't have a specific advice. Just be clear on what you want to do within these kind of organizations. Then you feel close to you. But both profiles are quite useful.
Thank you very much. Then my suggestion is then to take a break. Should we say 10 minutes until 1:15? And then we are back here with Marine and Adelina. So I don't know, Bianca, if you're leaving us, thank you very much again.
Yes, thank you very much.
For you. Thanks
Thank you for your invitation. Thank you. It was very nice seeing everyone. And anytime the students need any advice, of course, you can contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bianca.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so after a short break at 1:15, we are going to continue with the second part, which is focusing on health law. We will have two distinguished speakers, Marine and Adelina. So we will be back after a short break. Welcome back, everyone. I suggest we slowly start in 1 or 2 minutes. Can you hear me, see me?
Yep. Can you hear us, Eva? Good morning.
Yes, hello, good morning.
Okay, super. Just checking the mic.
Yes, it's working well. Okay, so welcome to the second part of this panel, and now we are going to explore together some career options, working possibilities, and interesting activities in the field of health. So health and healthcare related work in an international environment, health law, human rights and health, health and humanitarian action. These are the topics that we are going to discuss during this hour. And it's my pleasure to welcome two distinguished guests, Marine and Adelina. We are going to start with Marine Boussenier. Very nice to have you here, Marine. Welcome.
It's my pleasure.
Couple of words of introduction. So Marine works as an independent researcher and consultant in the fields of global health, human rights, and humanitarian action. And she's currently advising Resolve to Save Lives, which is a global public health initiative which helps governments and civil society on epidemic preparedness, and also supports health ministers of low and medium income countries on their COVID-19 response, very actual topic. And Marine also co-chairs Médecins Sans Frontières, the transformational investment capacity. And until 2015, Marine was the director of the Open Society Foundation's public health program. We used to work together on the Roma project there, because this program works to improve access to healthcare for several marginalized members of the society, which includes people who use drugs, but also sex workers, transgender persons, people with mental disabilities, ethnic minorities such as the Roma people, and people who are in need of palliative care. Between 2003 and 2007, Marine was the Secretary General of Médecins Sans Frontières International, and Marine also worked in the field with MSF between 1995 and 2003. And currently, Marine sits on the board of directors and the investment committee of Grand Challenge Canada, and on the International Advisory Board of Geneva's Global Health Center and the Advisory Council of Last Mile Health. So, Marine, could you tell us a little bit more about your work? So what is it that you're doing concretely, and why is this an interesting work and an important one?
Thanks a lot, Eva, and thanks for inviting me to engage with this group. It's a great pleasure, and I just caught the intel of your prior session, and I think that was very insightful. What am I doing today? Somehow I joined or started supporting the organization Resolve to Save Life in 2017, 2 years before COVID. And the primary theme of my work was epidemic prevention. So I, of all people, cannot say I didn't know what was coming. And the work that I was doing then and the work that I'm doing today are very similar. It's to help countries, to help ministries of health identify where their core weaknesses are in terms of surveillance, epidemiological surveillance, in terms of preparation of the workforce for the epidemic scenario, and help them address the gaps that they've identified in the manner that will allow them to be ready come the epidemic or come the next epidemic. And actually, there's interestingly a strong legal dimension to that as well. The international health regulations, last revised in 2005, connect squarely the legal and health dimension in ways that few instruments do. The other one is the Tobacco Convention framework, but really trying to help country operationalize the international health regulations. So that's what I was doing until COVID started, and then COVID happened, and of course, like everybody, we switch into response mode and trying to support countries there in meaningfully planning and addressing the needs of their populations and citizens in the various phase of the COVID epidemic. And when I was reflecting yesterday about the intersection of health and rights in COVID, I mean, just on my plate this week in terms of conversation, we've been having debates around ethics and implications of travel passports in the COVID-19 context, considerations and parameters around making vaccine mandatory for certain groups, including healthcare worker, vaccine equity and access, and the whole debate that I'm sure all of you have been following around the TRIPS waiver, which would give WTO member state back the power to allow companies within their borders to make COVID vaccines without violating WTO rules and IPR, intellectual property rights. But also, questions of liability exemptions for delivery of products by company. I mean, it's endless. It seems that everything is at the intersection of health and law and rights. So that's been what has been occupying me in the past few months, and that's been what's been on my mind, Eva.
Thank you, and thank you also very much for highlighting indeed the intersection between the health-related work, especially COVID response, and the human rights dimension and the legal and regulatory dimension. Could you please tell us a bit about how you opted for this career? So what was your main motivation when you decided to combine health-related work with these aspects? And how did you come to work as a researcher and consultant?
Yeah, so if I'm completely honest, it was by pure chance. Ultimately, I know why I stayed and continued in that path, but I started by pure chance. I knew I was interested in health generally. I knew that humanitarian action was something I had some interest for, but I wasn't sure how to get into it. I think I had a sense of wanting to work in the realm of justice, and I knew that I wanted to operationalize, or at least I had a sense that solidarity doesn't stop at your own borders. And so completely uncannily and disconnected from my initial academic experience, because I first studied business, actually. I wanted to go to Asia, I wanted to go to Japan, and actually I stopped in China because I didn't have the money to go all the way to Tokyo. And I ended up staying there 5 years. And like everybody, we all have seminal stories, and mine is that I was running a coffee shop, and in the evening I started having street children coming to my coffee shop asking for the leftover food that we would have cooked during the day. And so we started giving them the food, and then a little bit later there were more kids, so we started cooking for them, and then a little bit later some kids were sick, so we started to try and find doctors to help them. And then a little bit later we realized that in the midst of winter it was hard for the kids to sleep outside, so we started renting out apartments for them. And then of course the Chinese authorities came and said, you don't have any authorization to do that, and they were right. We didn't. And by then I had understood the power of action and what one can do on the ground. And I approached what I knew then were NGOs, international organizations that could have an interest in the type of issues that I had been seeing with the street kids at the intersections of also here, individual sufferings of the children, but also the functioning of the state when it comes to children's rights and children's care. And I ended up knocking on the door of MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, who picked up the program, started a street children program in China, and then the rest is history, in the sense that I started working for Médecins Sans Frontières then and didn't leave for another 15 years afterwards. So in a sense, I fell into it. It presented itself to me. and once I was in it, then I didn't stop. I found that the meaningfulness of engaging at that level of action was what drove me, what was making me passionate about what I was doing, and so I decided to continue that way. So I did humanitarian action for about 15 years, 18 years. And then I grew frustrated by humanitarian action because, when I was looking at the budget that we had over the years when I worked for MSF, I was looking at the annual report that we had 10 years difference, and the top 10 countries of investment were still the same, and we were still doing the same thing. So we were still working in Afghanistan on maternal child health, and in DRC on violence, and in Sudan on famine, and so it was the same thing year in, year out, and the frustration of not seeing structural progress, which of course is not the ambition of humanitarian action, really made me want to explore other ways of engaging, and I ultimately ended up with Open Society Foundations, where I had the great pleasure to work with you, Eva, and trying there to address some of the structural issue and power dynamics that manifest themselves in the health and rights space. And I think a great example, and you've mentioned it, is the Roma space, where the structural issue and the discriminations which have been ingrained for centuries do not lend themselves to a unidimensional, single, simple type of solution. What you're looking at is always a multifaceted set of answers that I think beg and demand the type of multidisciplinarity that clearly your students and yourselves as faculty are trying to breed between health and law and politics and policy. I think I'll stop it there for now.
Okay, I would have one more question, and then I'm going to open the floor and invite the students to ask questions as well. And my following question is about your current work. Are you also yourself engaged in advising governments, ministers of low and medium income countries about the COVID-19 response? If you could talk a little bit more about this, how does this work look like? What is it that makes it challenging, and how can you overcome these challenges?
Sure. So the countries in which I work primarily in Francophone country in Sub-Saharan Africa and also in Haiti, in the Caribbean. So my portfolio is really the Francophone countries. You don't start working with the government in the midst of a pandemic. The relationship usually comes before. Which is what allows you, when a pandemic starts, to actually have a base from which to jump together in the preparation mode. So when the pandemic started, I think we were acutely aware that some of the low and middle income countries would not have the type of resources that maybe high income countries would have in terms of countermeasures. And, even their high income countries ended up being, has hit, and some of them answering worse than some low and middle income countries. So this needs to be nuanced for sure. But depending on the countries, what you saw is that they either established a presidential task force with their president taking the political leadership and bringing around the table a multi-sectoral group of minister representatives from usually security, health, trade, tourism, justice. And this platform was supposed to, or is supposed, depending on the countries, to guide the overall parameters of the response, which then are operationalized through emergency operation centers that are both running the programmatic dimension of the response and at the same time trying to decide on the public health and social measures that the country should adopt. So should they open or close the school? Should they open or close the border? Should they install a curfew? Who needs to be prioritized for what? How does one need to think about key essential services? What sort of mitigation measures should be put in place if you impose a curfew or a lockdown so that people actually have the means to survive and that the cure doesn't become worse than the initial harm, right? So my role in that has been multidimensional. One of them has been to assist and support directly with the policy making around public health and social measures and help them decide based on epidemiological criteria which type of measure can they put in place and what are the triggers that should generate reflections on the appropriateness of the public health and social measures that are put in place. So that's one dimension of the work. And then another dimension of the work has been on the risk communication and community engagement, in particular around the myths that are proliferating around COVID. And yeah, trying to set the ground for vaccine acceptance if and when they come. And maybe that comes to the place of the challenge that you're talking about, Eva, is that in most of those countries, the vaccines are going to be elusive for many, many months to come. Last I looked, low-income countries had received 0.3% of all the vaccines administered globally. And most of the vaccines are spoken for, which are in productions or will be in productions for the next few months. So you're going to have a period of time ahead of us, this next 6 to 9 months, where you're going to have a world at two speed, one that restarts and goes back to the movie and one that piles up the body bags. So that's the struggle. I think we're coming back to the power question, right? You're coming back to the imbalance. Who could negotiate for vaccines access and who cannot? So a lot in there, but I would say the men struggle, the men challenge in that context when you work in a situation of crisis with low and middle income countries in the COVID context, for me, has been external. It's been really the questions of the supplies and the ability to secure a place at the table for global discussions that impact low and middle income countries.
Yes, thank you very much for pointing that out. And I can imagine indeed that the struggle is real. And I would also like to invite now our students. So please feel free to ask your questions about Marine's experience. She does have indeed truly international experience working in several countries, in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in the US. So the floor is open for questions.
There is one question in the chat, Eva Maria. Okay.
So my answer would be, it depends. It depends what you're trying to solve. You could flip the question, actually, the other way around. So I think, I think you need to think of the law as a tool and a very powerful tool. You think to think of health problems as multidimensional. So I think is the law the right tool to address the health issue at hand? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it is not, and one makes the world of a difference. We've seen when I was working together with Eva at Open Society Foundations, the power of the law when actually it is combined with other strategies that include usually documentation, advocacy, mobilizations of key constituencies, influence of decision makers, identification of stakeholders who can really change the conversation about very difficult subjects. And there the law can be just one tool amongst many tools, and a powerful one if it is well used. And there in this context, what happens is that you tend to have lawyers working together with health professionals or public health specialists. And it is the complementarity between the law and health that helps you achieve the greatest impact. Now, if you have the chance to have someone that knows both, that knows health and the law, it is often quite extraordinary because it gives you a lot of shortcuts, because it gives you a depth of analysis and understanding, and it helps you bridge the legal world and the health world in a way that you don't necessarily do if you don't have that in one person. But is that a prerequisite or is that a sine qua non? I wouldn't necessarily say so on everything. On some things probably, but not on everything. I think it's extremely fulfilling. I think don't do a job you don't like. So I'm still in it. It's still that I like it. So it's also immensely frustrating. It's a never-ending. It's a never-ending set of fights. It's a Sisyphus battle, right? You push one stone up and it goes back down. And but yes, absolutely. I think there's a sense of meaningfulness and yeah, fulfillment to a certain extent, but combined with frustration and anger at times, for sure. But you know, if it was not fulfilling, don't do it, because the work is the work is hard enough. If you don't derive satisfaction in it, then I would suggest to look elsewhere, because you're not going to make a lot of money in that space. So you have to find other satisfactions for doing it.
I can also see Noemi. Would you like to raise a question? I can see your hand up.
Yes, indeed. I would also like to start my video so that so people can see me. Yes. Hello. Thank you so much for being here today. This also goes to all the other panelists, of course. I have to say that I'm not too familiar with health law yet, but I'm really happy to learn and to be here. And my question kind of surrounds the problems that are created through the privatization of the health sector, which we can see, for example, in the patents surrounding the COVID vaccine, but also in the privatization of hospitals and all that. And I wanted to give an example. A friend of mine works in a hospital, and he is now no longer allowed to call his patients, but he has to call them clients. And I think that really shows that motivation behind it. And I was wondering, does the law support that development into this more privatized and more, in a way, capitalistic approach? Or does it go more into the human side, I would say? I'm sorry for this formalization. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Noemi. Is there anybody on the call from Lebanon by any chance? Or that has worked in Lebanon? Okay, no, so I'll have to do it myself. The reason why I'm asking that is because Lebanon is a case in point. Lebanon has some guarantees in its laws about access to health. It actually has a social security and health law that's very similar to France, that guarantees access to healthcare. But 80% of the provision of services is privatized. So what you usually have is not a situation where the law doesn't guarantee any access to health. It's a situation where there's been a choice that has been made for the provision of that care to be made by the private sector, which is reimbursed by the public sector for the services that they're providing on their behalf. So what you're seeing then is a lot of palatable negative consequences of privatization, and you've named one, Noemi, with this mentality, the switch of mentality from patients to clients. But in contemporary Lebanon, what that means as well is for the past 10 years, you've had a health system that was more driven by profit than by well-being, and hence by private providers that were inflating the types of screening, tests, measures, drugs that people needed to be prescribed and have access to, with little concern for what that meant for the public purse, and more of a concern for what that meant for the profit margin, and also not necessarily actually a complete relevance for what that meant for the quality of patient's care and patient's life. So you see the derivatives and the consequences of the privatizations in multiple dimensions, but it's rarely because the law says you don't have access to healthcare, go get it in the private system. It's by the policy choices that have been made, and that's where I think you're looking at maybe more there in that space, the policy orientations, many of which date back from 20, 30 years ago in terms of what type of public health system one wants, and how it should operate, and what type of social contract the states wants to have with their citizens around health. And those are very, they're very, very national dimensions and national debates. But I'm sure you'll have experience of ways it plays out in different countries. I'm sure many of the students on the calls have experience of that as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. For this first part, we have like 5 more minutes, so a couple of more questions are possible. I cannot see the chat properly. I'm not sure if there are any questions in the meantime arriving through the chat.
I might have one if possible, if students don't have more, of course.
Yes, please.
I was just having your point of view on the role that multinational companies are playing, especially in this period in the production of the vaccine, for instance, because when the pandemic exploded, we all looked at the multinational companies with the hope to have the vaccine, but now we are all going against them because the vaccine has to be distributed in a more fair way, of course. What's your point of view on the role that multinational plays in this sector?
Yeah, I could speak for 5 hours about that, and it makes me that's one that makes me very angry and frustrated. I sit in the US, so let me take the example of Moderna. 99% of the development that has happened for the current vaccine in the past 18 months has been funded by taxpayer money in the US to the tunes of many billions of dollars, and that built on the back of 10 years of research by the NIH, the National Institute of Health in the US, who actually owns some of the primary patents to the vaccines that Moderna has developed. Because some of the initial science was developed in their lab by their scientists. So you're talking about a publicly developed vaccines, advanced market commitment with public money for those very vaccines. And you have basically a company and a board of directors of those companies that are not only refusing basically to approach equity with any genuine engagement, but is also simultaneously promising that eventually by 2022, 2023, they will be producing enough, and hence there is no need for other to currently be the recipients of tech transfer or start producing and manufacturing vaccines of their own, which lead to the situation in which we are today, which I was describing, of a gap for the next few months, where low and middle income countries are not going to have access to vaccines. So in a sense, I shouldn't be surprised. Multilateral companies have done that of all times. That's what they are. They answer to their shareholders. They don't answer to the public. But I'm just as angry at the public payers that have supported the R&D, that have met the advanced market commitments, that have rights over some of those vaccines, and that are not using them for the public good. So, I'm not certainly letting the multinational off the hook. I think, we need to go after Moderna and Pfizer, BioNTech, and the others. But I also think that some governments should be using the tools at their hand. I mean, take the example of the US. They have margin rights for anything that has been developed in the academic setting. They have one patent already, at least one on the Moderna vaccines. They have, Federal Law 1498 that allows them to use any inventions on their soil for reasons of public health. They have whatever they want. They could use anything. They're just not using it because it's considered a nuclear option, because it's considered extreme, because they don't want to upset the lobbies, because they don't want to upset the companies. So I think there's the problem of the company, and then there's the problem of our leaders and what they do or what they don't do with the tools at their disposals. I don't know if that answers your question, Marco.
Thank you. One more question. We have a couple of more minutes left. Maybe I have one last question for Marine. What would you advise to our students if they want a career in the field of health and human rights, health and humanitarian law, health and law broadly? How to best prepare for it, and what skills are the most important in your experience? I know we had the discussion already whether it's health or law and the complementarity of those.
But
I would about the skills that we can help students develop.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's less skills than it is a way of thinking about it. Whether it's from the entering the law and health field from the law angle or from the health angle, I think it's about being critical. Keep your critical mind, deconstruct what you're being told, question what you're presented as the status quo. So I think keeping the critical inquiry mindset and the critical mind is absolutely essential. Be curious and be ready to do everything. Build your field credential. There's no job too small. Go do the work, which many of you, on this call are doing, have been doing, will be doing. But that is where you add value, and then you can aspire to other things. Do not give up on humanity. Even in the face of human atrocity and frustrations, you will see humanity shine. Do not give up on it. And love what you do. If you don't, go do something else, because otherwise you're just not gonna survive very long or bring the most value that you could.
And keep the faith.
That too.
Thank you very much, Marine. Thank you once again. And now I'm going to move to our next speaker for the last half an hour. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Adelina, who is a graduate of our program. Adelina Itzova, our alumna. She's currently working in the field of quality and regulatory compliance at 4Web Medical, which is an implant device company. As I understand, it was founded in Dallas. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Back in 2008. So Adelina has been working in this position since 2017. She holds a bachelor degree from our program in international and European law. She was originally profiling herself in criminal law, as I understood. So that was your first, passion. And then, but you also acquired international experience. You were interning at the Bulgarian embassy, but also at the International Criminal Court, as I understand. And then you went to London for a while for a master program, but then you decided to return to the Netherlands, where you decided to work for your current company. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how you decided to opt for this field, and why is it that you think that medical device regulatory compliance is an exciting area?
Yes, of course. Well, thank you for the floor. I first wanted to say that it's an honor for me to be among those individuals. So thank you for this opportunity. Just a little bit of background maybe about myself. So my name is Adelina. Before I come here, perhaps maybe I should tell you more about why I chose Netherlands to pursue my studies. So in Bulgaria, I was advised by my agency, because I already know that I want to study law. I already knew that I wanted to study international law, because otherwise I would just be limited to stay in Bulgaria and to eventually pursue the national law. But I wanted to go a step further than that. So due to the fact that most of the international organizations are based in the Netherlands, I was advised to pursue my education here, exactly, which advice I, of course, followed, as you can see. Right after my bachelor, so yeah, maybe before, because you mentioned that my interest lied in international criminal law. Indeed, they were. I found this subject, and of course, because my father is a lawyer in this sector in Bulgaria, I really found it the most intriguing subject which my bachelor degree could have offered. So then I done a specialization in international criminal law, which of course led to the logical decision to pursue a master's degree in the same subject, going to London. However, I decided to quit this master degree at some point and came back to the Netherlands to search for an actual job. I struggled a lot, I can admit, because finding a job in the legal sphere, and especially international legal sphere, it has lots and lots of challenges, not because only about the unrealistic expectations which companies and organizations impose on young professionals. I don't think this had changed much. I don't think that it will, unfortunately. But also, of course, because working for those institutions, you definitely has to have some connections in order to have this advantage to work there. So also, because of a chance, just as Maureen mentioned, I found the job that I currently work. I work, as you mentioned, in the field of quality and regulatory compliance for medical devices. My company produces 3D printed implants for spine. Considering the predominantly legal crowd, I'm not going to bore you with anything medical. Don't be scared. Not that I can. So, in short, what I do consists of two main parts. The first one is quality, which consists of making sure that the documentation for our products is succinct, traceable, and in accordance with the ISO standards. This is the International Standardization Organization. This generally includes, of course, also communication with our suppliers, doing some inspections, and as I like to call it, surgery proofing, which is making sure that the product can be shipped to hospitals without any concerns, legal or whatsoever. The second part is the regulatory, which is the tricky one. It generally entails the process of making sure that the company is compliant with the medical device regulation, which replaced the medical device directive. Maybe what attracted me to start doing this job. The main reason I'm in this company currently is basically the idea behind it. That's what attracted me in the first place. It was not only the novelty of the product, but also the noble cause behind it, because, you know, we were essentially helping people. It was a very new field for me, in a sense, I have to admit. Even though, you know, I had law school to support what I was getting into, and even if the latter requires strong mental state, I have to admit that there are lots of challenges at first. The main challenges, I can say, the main challenge probably is the daily struggle to satisfy both the demands of the business and the requirements that the law itself imposes on you. Because the reality working for a company is, of course, that you have both. And as a legal professional, one of the things that we're often tempted to do is to bend the rules in order to, you know, sometimes it's even desirable to do so, so that they can work in your favor. This is great. but there's no bending in medical device law. It can still be very vague, of course, as every law and regulation, but it is also generously strict. And you have no choice to read it carefully, and to find a way to ensure that your company comply to the smallest letters, because your accreditation and your course of business depend on that at the end of the day. And you have people depending also on your product. So then you came to realization that business will suffer in the name of this, and you just have to find a way to ease that suffering in a way. And I'm not going to expose all my secrets how I do that, so maybe you can skip to to the next question.
Thank you, Adelina. We are not that much after your secrets. However, I know that you're working in a sector which is really rapidly developing, right? There's a lot of innovations, also rapid pace of innovation. So how does that affect your work? So how do you manage to keep up with the pace of development? Does it really affect you as the legal professional working there? And does it also require you to get more familiar with the technological side?
Yeah, it definitely does. Because I don't really have to have any medical background to do what I do, but of course, in order to be up to date with what my company is doing on a daily basis, I have to know the structure. I have to know certain ways of how we do it, how the whole process, the operation, the every sector basically in our company works. It's a bit challenging, I would say, to keep up with all the new rules, because they're constantly changing. I mean, the medical device regulation is a pure example of that. I would say that it didn't drastically change what was already in the directive, but there are certain things that are definitely much more stricter and difficult to implement in the course of the business of medical devices. So I'm not sure if this answers what you asked entirely.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Let me see. Are there any questions? In the meantime, I'm opening up the floor, of course, and if you have questions, please feel free to raise them. So it's an indeed very exciting field at the intersection of law and technology. So we can get now an insight from a legal professional.
Yeah, so probably it was not clear enough. There's no much ambiguity in labeling in particular. The regulations and standards regarding labeling are very straightforward. Also in the MDR. So I would say that we do not struggle with labeling and do not find any issues with it, as we do follow what we have to comply with, because if we do not, our products won't go on the market. We have to submit our accreditation in both the FDA and the European market. So if our label is not correct and if they do not satisfy the requirements there, then this means that we take a step back, our products do not get in the market, and we cannot sell them, essentially. So yeah, we as a company do not find any struggles with that. Of course, there are a lot of things that you have to be careful. You know, with CE marking, for example, the exact thing that you put in the labels or in your instructions for use. So yeah, but I think we're good on that.
Thank you. Other questions? The floor is open.
Not much questions there. Actually, I realized that it's probably a field that's a bit like new to the viewers and participants in this. So I would not be surprised if there are not much interest or questions regards to that.
If I may, students don't have one, and I think I have a typical 3D demand, if possible, if allowed. In this case, yeah, if I can, no, I mean, I was quite interested in the area of work in the interconnection between law and new technologies is also something that we are strongly exploring. But my question is not on this area, but on the fact that coming back to discussion we were doing on the question of discrimination on gender-based attitudes. You are specialized in law and science. There are on the business side, there are two fields that are normally considered a groundwork for men. Did you ever, did you have ever experienced something that, for instance, had to oblige you to demonstrate something more, or was something more challenging for you to be a woman in this field in your professional career or in your work, or not?
Yes, that's a very good question. In terms of what we have already discussed, but my answer is no. I never felt discriminated against solely on the fact that I'm a woman. I don't think that the field that I'm working suggests anyhow that this can happen. I know that it can happen in lots of different fields, but in my case, fortunately, I have never felt that in any way.
So it was not your personal experience?
No, definitely not. And I don't really think that it's. I heard stories of this ever happening in this field of work development.
You're based in the Netherlands, but the headquarters are in the US, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, basically okay. Our suppliers are situated in the Netherlands.
But what happens in Brussels actually has a strong impact on your work, as I understand, because you were mentioning the adoption of the new regulation, the replacement of the previous directives with a stronger instrument, of course, which is directly applicable, and or the impact that that has on your work. So, as I understand, you also have a European dimension of your activities.
Exactly, because our course of business also is situated in Europe, so we have to be compliant with the European side of everything, and yeah, it does have a tremendous impact on the company itself. So yeah, it's a bit, it is a bit of a struggle, because then you have both US and the European side.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Adelina. I can see that we are kind of approaching the limit of this panel time-wise. Maybe one last question. We might have time for one last question. So let me see if there's any question. I can see Noemi's hand. Noemi, please. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. My question is, what are some great avenues to get into this field? And with that, I mean, of course, opportunities, but also resources to understand the scope of health law better and to, yeah, kind of get into it a bit more. What are some recommendations? This is a question for all the panelists, and I'm just happy about an answer.
Yeah, so you're asking more of a path that people can follow in order to do that. Well, I can say that it's not a very demanding field in terms of what's required for you. You can follow an ISO course. They're offered a lot nowadays. And you can start with that. It's not even a requirement to have a legal background per se. But my opinion is that it tremendously help, because on a daily basis you are exposed to reading and working with legal text, regulations, and so on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Anyone else of the panelists, if you want to react to, because I think Noemi's question was addressed to all of you, so I want to give an opportunity to react if you want.
I'm happy to jump in. Look at the organizations that are doing the type of work you would see yourself doing, and reach out. Find the person who's running their legal department. Find the intern or the person that interned there. Reach out, talk to them, ask them how they got it. Show your interest, offer yourself. I think that's surprisingly a more efficient way than one may think about.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also really think that probably the as a suggestion also, the easiest way I think to pick your career path is just to have a person that inspire you. Look up his or her career path on LinkedIn or on the internet, the qualification that he has, and set a goal to achieve exactly this. You can, in reality, I mean, you're copy pasting in a way, but it definitely works.
If I may, on my side, connections are important. In fact, I'm already connecting LinkedIn with all people participating in this event. But this is important. In the environment, which is let's say the social environment in Brussels, because this is plenty of NGOs, civil society organizations. This is really a big world. There is frankly speaking, a good level of opportunities coming from vacancies. There are many vacancies going on, and normally I have to say that as an Italian, this is why my background is important. We are not used to have vacancies where you can really compete and win because you are, let's say, the characteristics to have that kind of a job. With great surprise, I learned that it is possible to have this transparent way to and this is a door open for many young people entering in our world. Of course, working in the social field, more or less, like also Marine was saying, you must be very motivated because there are big satisfaction, but also huge frustration. But if you are really motivated, you have this opportunity. Many of people arrive here with an internships, especially through the European institutions, that I always recommend because it's really a very good experience, and many of them learn how to live in Brussels and to move in this bubble, and they arrive in this kind of world normally with good level of success, I would say.
Thank you for the suggestions. So indeed, be proactive, reach out, try again and again, build your contacts, and don't give up. Thank you also for the panelists. Thank you very much for joining us, for sharing your experience, for your advice, for tips and the suggestions. And thank you also for the students, for the participants, and to my co-chair, Stefania. It was a pleasure to welcome you all here. And thank you once again.
Likewise. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.